Mom, let's be honest here. You're financially worthless. You live off Dad's old pension, you drive a 15-year-old Honda, and you shop at discount stores. Meanwhile, I'm building a real career at Montgomery and Associates, making six figures and actually contributing something meaningful to society. So please, stop giving me financial advice when you clearly don't understand how money works in the real world.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The words hit me like a physical blow through the phone speaker. My son William had never spoken to me with such contempt, such dismissive cruelty. What he didn't know, what he had no idea about, was that I wasn't just some struggling widow living paycheck to paycheck. I was actually his boss's largest silent investor, controlling more of his precious company than he could ever imagine. And that financially worthless mother he'd just insulted. She was about to show him exactly what real money looked like. I stood in my modest kitchen in suburban Denver, still holding the phone long after William had hung up, staring at my reflection in the window above the sink. Claire Montgomery, 64 years old, widow of 3 years, mother of one ungrateful son. That's how William saw me now, a burden, a relic from a simpler time when people didn't understand real money. The irony wasn't lost on me as I looked around my deliberately understated home. The kitchen cabinets were original from 1987, the linoleum floors showed wear patterns from decades of use, and my ancient Kenmore refrigerator hummed with the persistence of something built to last forever. To William, these were signs of poverty, evidence of my financial irrelevance. To me, they were choices, conscious decisions to live below my means, while I built something he couldn't even comprehend. The argument had started, as they always did these days, over Sunday dinner. William had been complaining about his apartment rent, how expensive it was to maintain his lifestyle on his marketing director's salary, how he wished he could afford the downtown loft his colleague Francis Dane had just purchased. "Have you considered moving somewhere more affordable?" I'd suggested gently, passing him the mashed potatoes I'd made from scratch. "There are nice neighborhoods where you could get more space for, Mom, please." William had interrupted with that particular tone of exasperation he'd perfected over the past year. "I can't live in some suburban tract house like this. I work with important clients, I have a reputation to maintain. My colleagues live in luxury buildings downtown. I need to be where the action is." I'd bitten my tongue as I always did when he talked about his important job at Montgomery and Associates. The marketing firm was indeed successful, specializing in digital campaigns for tech startups and established corporations. William was proud of his role there, constantly talking about his innovative strategies and his close working relationship with the senior partners. What he didn't know was that I knew more about Montgomery and Associates than he did. I knew their quarterly earnings down to the penny, their client acquisition costs, their profit margins, and their 5-year expansion plans. I knew because I'd been their primary financial backer for the past 4 years, though they knew me only as C. Montgomery Holdings, a carefully structured investment entity that allowed me to maintain complete anonymity. "You just don't understand the business world, Mom," William had continued, warming to his favorite theme. "It's not like when you and Dad were young. Everything moves faster now, competition is fierce, and image matters. I can't show up to client meetings driving a beat-up Honda like yours." "Your father and I understood business quite well," I'd said quietly, but William had barely heard me. "Dad sold insurance, Mom. That's not the same as what I do. I'm developing cutting-edge marketing strategies for companies that are revolutionizing entire industries. The stakes are completely different." That's when I'd made my mistake. I'd mentioned that I'd been reading about digital marketing trends, that I'd noticed some interesting data about social media engagement rates that might be relevant to his work. Mom, stop. William's voice had taken on that sharp edge that always made my heart sink. You read some article in AARP magazine and think you understand my field. I have an MBA. I work with clients worth millions of dollars. I don't need marketing advice from someone who's never held a real job. The accusation had stung, partly because William genuinely believed it. In his mind, the 23 years I'd spent as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, the evening classes I'd taken to earn my business degree, the careful financial planning that had allowed me to support our family while building my own investment portfolio, none of that counted as real work. After my husband Richard died 3 years ago, I'd made the decision to let William believe I was struggling financially. It seemed kinder somehow, less threatening to his emerging independence. When he'd offered to help with my mortgage payments, I gently declined, saying I was managing okay on Richard's pension. When he'd suggested I sell the house and move to a senior community, I demurred, claiming I couldn't afford the transition costs. I'd thought I was protecting his ego, allowing him to feel like the successful adult child who didn't need to worry about taking care of his aging mother. I'd thought I was giving him the gift of believing in his own independence. Instead, I'd apparently given him permission to view me as financially incompetent. The Sunday dinner had deteriorated from there. William had launched into a lecture about fiscal responsibility, about the importance of understanding market forces, about how your generation had been able to coast on pensions and Social Security in ways that were no longer possible. The world has changed, Mom, he'd said, cutting his pot roast with unnecessary force. You can't just expect to live comfortably without understanding how money really works. That's why so many seniors end up struggling. They never learn to adapt to modern financial realities. I'd sat there quietly eating the meal I'd prepared with ingredients I'd purchased without checking prices, in the home I'd owned outright for over a decade, listening to my son explain how the modern world worked to someone who'd been navigating it quite successfully without his knowledge. The conversation had ended with William storming out after dessert, claiming he had important work calls to make, leaving me to clean up alone while he sat in his car in my driveway, probably texting his girlfriend Caroline about how exhausting it was to deal with his out-of-touch mother. But it was this afternoon's phone call that had crossed the line. William had called ostensibly to apologize for his behavior at dinner, but instead had doubled down, delivering that brutal assessment of my worth that still echoed in my empty kitchen. Financially worthless. If only he knew. The call came 3 days later, while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, the small den off the kitchen that William had always dismissed as my craft room. He had no idea that behind the innocuous door decorated with family photos and motivational calendars, I maintained a sophisticated workspace complete with dual monitors, a secure internet connection, and filing cabinets containing investment documents worth more than his annual salary. Mom, we need to talk. William's voice carried that particular tone of forced patience that I'd come to dread. I'd been thinking about our conversation on Sunday. I minimized the spreadsheet I'd been analyzing, Montgomery and Associates' third-quarter performance metrics, and gave him my full attention. I'm listening. I realize I may have come across as harsh, but I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your financial situation. Caroline and I have been discussing it, and we're worried about you. The mention of Caroline made my stomach tighten. His girlfriend of 8 months was a sweet girl, but she worked as a sales associate at a boutique clothing store, and shared William's assumptions about my circumstances. The idea that they'd been having discussions about my finances felt like a violation of privacy I hadn't consented to. What kind of discussion? I asked carefully. Mom, you're 64 years old. You're living in a house that's probably falling apart, driving a car that could break down any day, and from what I can see, you're barely scraping by on Dad's pension. This isn't sustainable.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I looked around my office, taking in the ergonomic chair that had cost more than William's monthly car payment, the professional-grade printer I used for confidential documents, the small safe hidden behind family photos that contained backup drives with investment records, dating back 15 years. I'm managing fine, William. No, Mom, you're not. And I can't keep pretending otherwise just to spare your feelings. Caroline made a good point. She said that sometimes being kind means being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. The irony of receiving financial advice from a 26-year-old who'd never balanced a budget was almost amusing. Caroline was a lovely girl, but her idea of financial planning involved saving enough money to buy designer handbags. The fact that she was now my son's advisor on my economic situation felt surreal. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "I think you need to sell the house." The words hung in the air between us. I stared at the framed photo on my desk, William's college graduation, both of us beaming with pride as he held his MBA diploma, the same degree he now wielded like a weapon against my supposed financial ignorance. "Sell the house," I repeated slowly. "Yes, it's too big for you. The maintenance costs are probably killing you. And the property taxes alone must be a huge burden. You could move into one of those nice senior living communities, something more appropriate for your budget. Use whatever equity you have left to cover the expenses." Whatever equity I have left. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Mom, I know it's hard to accept, but you're house poor. The place is probably worth what? Maybe $180,000 in this market. After you pay off whatever's left on the mortgage and cover moving expenses, you might have enough left for a decent apartment in a senior complex." I almost laughed. William had no idea that I'd paid off the mortgage 7 years ago, or that our modest neighborhood had appreciated significantly due to its proximity to the new tech corridor. The house he dismissed as a financial burden was actually worth closer to $420,000, and I owned it free and clear. "And where would I go?" I asked. Caroline found some really nice places. "There's Sunset Manor about 20 minutes from here. It's got activities, meal plans, transportation services, very affordable. Or if you want to be closer to us, there's Golden Years Village downtown. More expensive, but you'd be near shops and restaurants, and we could visit more often." "You want me to move into a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's assisted living. There's a difference. These places are designed for active seniors who just need a little help with daily tasks and want to be part of a community. I don't need help with daily tasks. Mom, please. You're struggling to maintain that house. You're driving a car that's older than some of my colleagues, and every time we talk, I can hear the stress in your voice about money. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's realistic." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd maintained for over 20 years. The flower beds were meticulously planned, with perennials I'd chosen for their longevity and seasonal interest. The vegetable garden in back produced enough tomatoes and herbs that I often shared extras with neighbors. The lawn was pristine, maintained by a landscaping service that William assumed I couldn't afford. "Have you discussed this with Caroline's parents?" I asked. "What does that have to do with anything? I'm curious about their perspective on senior living arrangement. Do they think 64 is the appropriate age to move into assisted living?" "Mom, this isn't about age. It's about financial reality. Caroline's parents aren't in the same situation you are." "And what situation is that?" "Exactly." There was a pause, and I could almost hear William choosing his words carefully. "Mom, you're broke. I know you don't want to admit it, but the numbers don't lie. Dad's pension probably covers your basic living expenses, but there's no cushion for emergencies, no money for home repairs, or medical bills. What happens when the furnace breaks down, or the roof needs replacing? What happens if you get sick and need extended care? Those are valid concerns, I said neutrally. Exactly. That's why we need to plan now, while you still have some options. If you wait until there's a crisis, you'll have even fewer choices. I sat back down at my desk, my eyes falling on the portfolio summary I'd been reviewing earlier. Montgomery and Associates had exceeded their profit projections by 12% this quarter, thanks largely to 3 major client acquisitions that I'd personally facilitated through my network of business contacts. William probably thought those wins were due to his innovative marketing strategies. William, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm stupid? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? No, Mom. Of course not. You're not stupid, you're just financially naive. There's a difference. Financially naive. You've never had to manage money on this scale before. When Dad was alive, he handled all the big financial decisions. Right. You took care of the household budget, but the investments, the insurance, the long-term planning, that was his domain. It's not your fault that you're struggling with it now. The assumption was so fundamentally wrong that I didn't know where to begin correcting it. Richard had been wonderful with people, a natural salesman who could make anyone feel comfortable buying insurance. But financial planning had never been his strength. I'd been the one who managed our investments, who researched retirement accounts, who made the decisions that allowed us to build wealth while maintaining a modest lifestyle. But William had constructed a narrative that fit his assumptions about gender roles and generational differences, and nothing I said seemed to penetrate his certainty. So you think I should sell the house and move into Sunset Manor? I think you should consider your options while you still have them. Caroline and I could help you look at places, maybe even help with the moving process. We want to make this as easy as possible for you. The condescension in his voice was almost breathtaking. My son, who'd never owned property, who'd never managed anything more complex than his own checking account, was offering to help me navigate major life decisions, because he was convinced I couldn't handle them myself. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, but Mom, don't wait too long. These kinds of decisions get harder the longer you put them off, and some of the better places have waiting lists. After he hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the financial documents spread across my desk. Montgomery and Associates had been one of my most successful investments, but it certainly wasn't my only one. The portfolio I'd built over the past 3 years included real estate, technology stocks, and several small business partnerships that generated steady passive income. William thought I was financially worthless, living off Richard's modest pension, and struggling to maintain a house I couldn't afford. The reality was that I'd multiplied our savings several times over since Richard's death, largely by taking calculated risks that my conservative husband would never have approved of. But my son didn't just think I was broke. He thought I was incapable of understanding money at all. In his mind, I wasn't just poor, I was fundamentally incompetent to manage my own financial affairs. That hurt more than the insults about my car or my shopping habits. William didn't just think I was struggling financially, he thought I was too stupid to know I was struggling. It was time to consider showing him exactly how wrong he was. I spent the rest of that evening walking through my house with new eyes, seeing it the way William saw it, through the lens of someone who equated visible wealth with actual worth. The kitchen with its dated appliances and worn countertops. The living room furniture I'd chosen for comfort rather than style, pieces that had served our family well for 15 years, but showed their age. The hardwood floors that bore the scuff marks of decades of family life. To William, these were signs of poverty, evidence that I couldn't afford to update or modernize. He had no way of knowing that I'd deliberately chosen to maintain the house's modest appearance, while investing my money in appreciating assets, rather than depreciating home improvements. Every dollar I hadn't spent on granite countertops or stainless steel appliances had gone into carefully researched investments that now generated more monthly income than his salary. But sitting alone in my supposedly shabby living room, I began to wonder if my strategy had been a mistake. I'd thought I was being financially wise, living below my means, while building wealth for the future. Instead, I'd created a situation where my own son viewed me as a financial failure. The phone rang again around 9 o'clock. This time it was Elizabeth Cross, my oldest friend and the only person who knew the full extent of my business activities. "Claire, you sound terrible," she said after I answered. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth and I had known each other since college, and she'd watched me transform from a young mother juggling part-time bookkeeping with childcare into a savvy investor with a diverse portfolio. She'd been my sounding board during the early days after Richard's death, when I was learning to trust my financial instincts, without his conservative influence tempering my decisions. "William wants me to sell the house and move into assisted living," I said without preamble. "He what?" Elizabeth's voice shot up an octave. "Claire, you're 64, not 84. And you're hardly struggling financially. He doesn't know that." "Well, whose fault is that?" The question stung because it hit at the heart of my guilt. I'd made a conscious choice to hide my financial success from William, initially to protect his independence, and later because the deception had become too complicated to unravel. "I thought I was doing the right thing," I said quietly. "When Richard died, William was just starting to establish himself at Montgomery and Associates. He was so proud of being able to support himself, of not needing our help anymore. I didn't want him to feel like he had to take care of me, or worry about my finances." "So you let him think you were broke?" "I let him think I was managing on Richard's pension. Yes, I thought it would be easier for him, less pressure." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "Claire, you do realize how this sounds, don't you? You've been secretly investing in his company for 4 years, helping to fund his success, while letting him believe you're some kind of financial charity case." "I never thought of it that way. How did you think of it?" I sank deeper into my armchair, pulling one of Richard's old Afghans around my shoulders. "I thought I was being supportive without being intrusive. He's always been so determined to succeed on his own merit. If he knew I was involved with Montgomery and Associates, he'd question every promotion, every successful project. He'd wonder whether his achievements were real or just the result of his mother pulling strings." "Are they real?" "Of course they are," I said quickly. "William is genuinely talented at what he does. I've seen his campaign proposals, his client presentations. He's creative and strategic and hard-working. My involvement with the company has been about providing capital and business guidance, not about getting my son special treatment. But he doesn't know that." "No. And now he thinks you're so financially incompetent that you need to be moved into a nursing home." "Assisted living," I corrected automatically, then realized how absurd that sounded. "Elizabeth, what have I done?" "You've created a mess," she said bluntly. "But it's not unfixable. You just need to decide what you want more, William's respect or his ignorance." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of carefully maintained deception. When did it get so complicated? I used to be able to talk to him about anything. Now every conversation feels like navigating a minefield. When did this change? Really? When did William start treating you like you were incompetent? I thought back over the past year, trying to pinpoint when our relationship had shifted. I think it started after he got promoted to marketing director. Suddenly he was making more money than Richard and I ever made from the insurance business, at least as far as he knew. He started talking about real careers and the modern economies like his father and I had been playing house for 30 years. And you never corrected him. How could I? If I told him about my investments, I'd have to explain how I could afford them. If I told him about Montgomery and Associates, he'd feel like his whole career was built on a lie. Is it? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about the board meetings I'd attended over the past 4 years, the strategic decisions I'd influenced, the capital investments I'd approved that had allowed the company to expand and take on bigger clients. Had I been helping William's career directly? Probably. Had I been giving him opportunities he wouldn't have had otherwise? Possibly, but I'd also seen him earn those opportunities through his own talent and hard work. The problem was that William would never be able to separate the two if he learned the truth. Elizabeth, he called me financially worthless, I said, my voice breaking slightly. My own son thinks I'm too stupid to manage my own life. Oh honey, he wants Caroline to help me look at senior living facilities. Caroline, who spends her entire paycheck on clothes and thinks a 401k is some kind of marathon. She's going to help me make financial decisions. Have you considered that maybe this is a blessing in disguise? How is any of this a blessing? Maybe it's time to stop hiding. You've spent 3 years pretending to be someone you're not, and look where it's gotten you. Your son doesn't respect you, he doesn't value your opinion, and he thinks you're incapable of taking care of yourself. Is that really better than him knowing the truth? I thought about William's dismissive tone when he talked about my AARP magazine financial knowledge, his assumption that I'd never held a real job, his certainty that I needed his guidance to navigate basic life decisions. What if he can't handle the truth? What if knowing about my involvement with his company makes him feel like everything he's accomplished is meaningless? Claire, you're not giving him enough credit. William is a grown man with a successful career. Yes, he might be shocked initially, but don't you think he deserves to know who his mother really is? I don't know anymore. I've been hiding for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be honest with him. Then maybe you should start with small steps. You don't have to reveal everything at once, but you can stop pretending to be helpless. After we hung up, I found myself wandering through the house again, but this time I was seeing it through my own eyes rather than William's imagined judgment. The kitchen might have older appliances, but they worked perfectly, and the space was laid out efficiently for someone who actually cooked. The living room furniture might not be fashionable, but it was comfortable and well made, built to last rather than impress. I'd chosen this lifestyle, deliberately valuing substance over appearance, financial security over visible wealth. But somewhere along the way, I'd let William's values, his emphasis on image and status symbols, make me ashamed of my choices. In my office, I pulled out the folder containing my complete financial portfolio: real estate investments, stock holdings, business partnerships, municipal bonds, and foreign currency positions that I'd researched and selected based on careful analysis of market trends and risk factors. The total value had crossed the 7-figure mark 2 years ago, but I'd never told anyone except Elizabeth and my financial advisor. I was, by any reasonable measure, wealthy. Not just comfortable, not just getting by on Richard's pension, but genuinely wealthy in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew me. Yet I'd allowed my son to believe I was one emergency away from financial ruin, too incompetent to manage my own affairs, in need of his guidance, and Caroline's helpful suggestions about senior living facilities. Elizabeth was right. I'd created this mess by choosing secrecy over honesty, and now I was reaping the consequences. The question was whether I had the courage to fix it, knowing that the truth might change everything between William and me. The irony wasn't lost on me, that while I'd been bold enough to make million-dollar investment decisions, I was apparently too cowardly to have an honest conversation with my own son. But tomorrow I decided that was going to change. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. I was in my office, reviewing the latest quarterly report from Montgomery & Associates, when my assistant Jennifer called from the firm's downtown headquarters. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said, using the professional alias I'd maintained for 4 years, "I'm calling about the board meeting scheduled for this afternoon. Mr. Lillard wanted to confirm your attendance for the discussion about the Henderson Industries account." I glanced at my calendar. The Henderson Industries pitch was William's current project, a major software company looking to rebrand their entire consumer division. He'd been working on the proposal for weeks, staying late at the office and constantly talking about how landing this client could establish Montgomery & Associates as a premier technology marketing firm. "Yes, I'll be there," I confirmed. "Has the preliminary proposal been distributed to board members?" "It's in your secure inbox. Mr. Lillard specifically requested that you review the creative strategy section before the meeting. He values your input on the market positioning approach." After hanging up, I accessed the company's internal system and downloaded William's proposal. For the next hour, I found myself genuinely impressed by his work. The campaign concept was innovative, the market research was thorough, and his understanding of Henderson Industries' target demographic was sophisticated. This wasn't the work of someone who'd succeeded due to family connections. This was the product of real talent and strategic thinking. But as I read deeper into the proposal, I began to see potential problems that William's enthusiasm had blinded him to. The budget projections were optimistic to the point of being unrealistic, the timeline didn't account for client revision cycles, and the proposed social media strategy assumed a level of audience engagement that was inconsistent with Henderson's brand history. These weren't fatal flaws, but they were the kinds of oversights that could cost Montgomery & Associates the contract if Henderson's executives were as detail-oriented as their reputation suggested. William had created brilliant creative work, but he'd missed some crucial business fundamentals that would matter to corporate decision-makers. I spent the morning making notes, not as his mother, but as a board member whose job was to ensure the company's proposals were competitive and profitable. The strange thing was how natural this felt, analyzing strategy, identifying risks, proposing solutions. This was work I was genuinely good at, work that had nothing to do with my relationship to William. The board meeting was held in the 32nd floor conference room of the Meridian Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. Cole Lillard, the managing partner, had assembled the usual group, myself appearing as C. Montgomery from Montgomery Holdings, Francis Dane Sr., a venture capitalist who'd invested early in the firm, Lila Cross, a marketing consultant who provided strategic guidance, and 2 other silent partners who preferred to remain in the background. "Before we begin," Cole said, settling into his chair at the head of the polished conference table, "I want to acknowledge that this Henderson Industries opportunity represents exactly the kind of client we've been positioning ourselves to attract. Landing this account would validate our expansion into enterprise-level technology marketing." I nodded along with the other board members, careful to maintain the professional demeanor I'd cultivated over 4 years of meetings. None of these people knew that C. Montgomery was actually Claire Montgomery, mother of their rising star marketing director. "The preliminary proposal is impressive," Francis Dane Sr. said, shuffling through his printed copy. "Young Patterson has clearly done his homework on Henderson's market position and competitive challenges. William has exceeded expectations since his promotion." Cole agreed. His client acquisition rate is outstanding, and his creative work consistently wins pitches. But I wanted board input on this particular proposal, because Henderson Industries has a reputation for being exacting. What are your specific concerns? Lila asked. Cole pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted screen. The creative strategy is solid, but I'm worried about execution details. Henderson's previous marketing firm was terminated mid-contract because they couldn't deliver on their promises. We can't afford to make similar mistakes. I looked at my notes, then at the faces around the table. These were successful business people who'd invested in Montgomery & Associates because they believed in its potential. They were counting on me to provide honest assessment, not maternal protection. I've reviewed the proposal carefully, I said, and I think Mr. Patterson has developed an excellent conceptual framework. The branding approach is sophisticated, and his market analysis is thorough. Cole leaned forward slightly. But there are some budget and timeline assumptions that may be problematic. The social media engagement projections, for example, are based on optimal scenarios that don't account for the learning curve typically required when launching campaigns for new client sectors. I spent the next 20 minutes walking through my analysis, pointing out areas where Williams' enthusiasm had led to overly aggressive projections. It was strange, critiquing my son's work in front of his employers while pretending not to know him personally, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I was being valued for my professional judgment, rather than dismissed for my supposed financial ignorance. These are excellent observations, Francis said when I finished. The question is whether we present the proposal as is and risk disappointment, or request revisions that might delay our submission. There's a third option, I suggested. We could present the creative strategy as proposed, which I believe is genuinely competitive, but modify the implementation timeline and budget to reflect more realistic projections. Henderson Industries will be more impressed by a proposal that under-promises and over-delivers than one that makes commitments we can't keep. Cole was taking notes rapidly. That makes sense. But Patterson has been working on this for weeks. Asking for major revisions at this stage might undermine his confidence going into the presentation. I felt the familiar protective instinct rising in my chest, but forced myself to respond as a board member rather than a mother. I think Mr. Patterson would prefer honest feedback now rather than losing the account, because we were afraid to challenge his assumptions. Based on his track record, I believe he'll appreciate the input and use it to strengthen his proposal. I agree, Lila said. Patterson strikes me as someone who values excellence over ego. He'll want to win this account, even if it means revising his initial approach.
The discussion continued for another hour, with the board ultimately deciding to request targeted revisions that would address the issues I'd identified while preserving the creative elements that made Williams' proposal distinctive. Cole would present the feedback as coming from board review without identifying me as the primary source of the concerns. As I walked back to my car after the meeting, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was proud of Williams' creative work and confident that the revisions would improve his chances of success. But I was also troubled by the deception that allowed me to influence his career while he remained completely unaware of my involvement. For 4 years I'd been telling myself that my business activities were separate from my relationship with William, that I was simply an investor who happened to have a son working at one of my portfolio companies. But today's meeting had made it clear that those lines were more blurred than I wanted to admit. I wasn't just providing capital to Montgomery & Associates, I was actively shaping strategy and policy in ways that directly affected Williams' work environment. The company he was so proud of working for, the supportive management structure that encouraged his creativity, the financial stability that allowed the firm to take risks on innovative campaigns.
All of that was influenced by investments and decisions I'd made. William thought he was succeeding on his own merit at an independent company. The reality was more complicated. He was succeeding on his own merit, but at a company where his mother was one of the most influential decision makers. The question that had been nagging at me for months became impossible to ignore. Was I helping William by providing a stable, well-funded work environment where his talents could flourish? Or was I undermining his independence by secretly controlling aspects of his professional life? As I drove home through the Denver traffic, passing the modest suburban neighborhoods where William assumed I belonged, I realized that the biggest problem wasn't what my son didn't know about my finances. The biggest problem was what I didn't know about the ethics of my own choices. I'd discovered that I had significant power in William's professional world. The question was what I was going to do with that knowledge. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Williams Henderson Industries' proposal undergo the revisions suggested by the board, and I witnessed something that filled me with both pride and guilt. Rather than being defensive about the feedback, William threw himself into refining his work with the kind of professional maturity that impressed even Cole Lillard. "Your boy's got real character," Francis Dane Sr. told me during our follow-up board meeting. "Most creative types get territorial when you suggest changes to their concepts." Patterson treated our input like gold, spent 2 weeks researching industry benchmarks to validate the revised projections. I nodded professionally while my heart swelled with maternal pride. William had taken the anonymous board feedback and used it to create something genuinely exceptional. The final proposal balanced creative innovation with business pragmatism in a way that showcased both his artistic vision and his growing understanding of corporate decision-making. But my involvement didn't end with that single meeting. As C. Montgomery Holdings, I found myself drawn deeper into the strategic operations of Montgomery & Associates, and consequently, deeper into the professional ecosystem that shaped William's daily experience. When the company needed additional office space to accommodate new hires, I facilitated the lease negotiations for the expanded suite on the 28th floor. When their technology infrastructure required upgrading to handle larger client campaigns, I approved the capital expenditure that allowed them to purchase state-of-the-art design software and collaboration tools. When a competing firm tried to poach their top talent with salary offers Montgomery couldn't match, I supported the retention bonuses that kept the team intact. Each decision was financially sound and strategically justified, but each decision also created a work environment where William could thrive. The expanded office meant he no longer had to share workspace with junior associates. The technology upgrades allowed him to produce more sophisticated campaigns in shorter timeframes. The retention of experienced colleagues meant he had access to mentorship and collaboration that accelerated his professional development. William interpreted these improvements as evidence of Montgomery & Associates' success and forward-thinking management. He had no idea that his financially worthless mother was the invisible hand ensuring that his workplace provided every tool and resource necessary for his continued growth. The irony became most apparent during our increasingly awkward family dinners. William would arrive at my modest kitchen full of excitement about his company's expansion, their new client acquisitions, their innovative approach to employee development. He described the office upgrades, the technology investments, the supportive management culture as proof that he'd chosen to work for a truly exceptional firm. "You should see our new conference room, Mom," he told me one Sunday, cutting into the pot roast I'd prepared while he unknowingly ate off china that cost more than his monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling smart boards, video conferencing capabilities that make client presentations feel like in-person meetings. Most firms our size can't afford that kind of infrastructure, but Montgomery & Associates really invests in giving us the tools we need to do our best work. I smiled and made appropriate encouraging sounds while internally calculating exactly how much that conference room had cost and remembering my vote to approve the expenditure. It sounds like your company values its employees, I said, which was true though incomplete. They do. Cole Lillard always says that talent is their most important asset, and they back that up with real investment. Just last month, they sent 3 of us to a digital marketing conference in San Francisco. All expenses paid, plus they covered our client work while we were gone so we didn't have to stress about falling behind. I remembered that conference. I'd been the board member who suggested that continuing education opportunities would be essential for staying competitive in the rapidly evolving digital marketing landscape. The $15,000 cost had been a small price to pay for ensuring that William and his colleagues remained at the forefront of industry trends. That's wonderful, dear. Did you learn anything useful? Mom, it was incredible. The keynote speaker was talking about AI integration in consumer behavior analysis, and I realized we could apply those concepts to the Henderson Industries campaign. I presented the idea to the team when we got back, and Cole thinks it could give us a significant competitive advantage. As William described his innovative insights, I found myself taking mental notes that I'd later incorporate into my next board report. His enthusiasm for emerging technologies aligned perfectly with the strategic direction I'd been advocating for Montgomery and Associates. Without realizing it, we were collaborating on the company's future, he as a creative practitioner and I as a strategic investor, but the collaboration was entirely one-sided. William shared his professional insights and aspirations with someone he believed was a struggling widow with no understanding of business dynamics. Meanwhile, I used those insights to make investment decisions and strategic recommendations that shaped his professional environment. The ethical implications kept me awake at night. I was essentially conducting corporate espionage at my own son's dinner table, gathering intelligence that informed million-dollar business decisions, while he assumed I was just making polite conversation about his work. Yet I couldn't deny the results. Montgomery and Associates was thriving, William's career was flourishing, and the strategic synergy between his ground-level insights and my capital-level influence was creating opportunities that neither of us could have achieved independently. The Henderson Industries presentation was scheduled for the following month, and early indicators suggested that Williams' revised proposal had positioned Montgomery and Associates as the frontrunner for the contract. If they won the account, it would validate everything I'd been working toward, proof that combining Williams' creative talents with strategic business support could achieve extraordinary results. But it would also mean that my son's biggest professional triumph would be built on a foundation of deception that was becoming more elaborate and harder to maintain with each passing day. I was no longer just hiding my financial success from William. I was actively orchestrating his professional success while allowing him to believe he was achieving it entirely through his own efforts. The question was no longer whether I should tell him the truth. The question was whether I could live with myself if I didn't. The weight of maintaining 2 completely different identities was beginning to take its toll in ways I hadn't anticipated. During the day, I was C. Montgomery, respected board member whose strategic insights were valued by seasoned business professionals. By evening, I transformed back into Claire, the financially struggling widow whose opinions about money were dismissed by her own son. The psychological strain of this constant code switching became apparent during a particularly difficult week in October. Henderson Industries had requested a second presentation, which William interpreted as an encouraging sign. He spent every evening at my kitchen table, spread his materials across the worn Formica surface, practicing his pitch, while I pretended to watch television in the living room. "Mom, could you keep the volume down?" he'd call out. "I need to focus on these revenue projections." I would dutifully lower the sound while fighting the urge to point out that his revenue projections were based on market analysis I'd helped commission, using data from research firms I'd personally vetted through my position on the board. Instead, I sat quietly in my shabby armchair, listening to my son practice a presentation that would never have existed without my invisible influence. The irony became unbearable when William started asking Caroline to review his work instead of me. Caroline has such good instincts about presentation flow, he explained one Sunday after she'd spent an hour suggesting changes to his slide deck. She understands how to communicate with executives in a way that builds confidence. I watched Caroline, 26 years old with a bachelor's degree in communications and 2 years of retail experience, offer feedback on a multi-million-dollar corporate proposal while William nodded thoughtfully at her suggestions. Meanwhile, my 4 years of board-level experience with enterprise client acquisition was apparently irrelevant because I shopped at discount grocery stores and drove an older car. Your mom could probably help too, Caroline suggested kindly. Sometimes an outside perspective is useful. William glanced at me with the patronizing smile I'd learned to dread. Mom doesn't really understand the business world we're operating in. This is pretty high-level stuff. I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to refill the coffee pot, and stood at the sink gripping the counter while listening to Caroline suggest that William's financial projections might be too complicated for his audience to follow. The same financial projections I'd spent 2 board meetings helping to refine. The breaking point came during a phone conversation with Elizabeth, who'd been watching my deteriorating emotional state with growing concern. "Claire, you're having an identity crisis," she said bluntly. "You've been living a lie for so long that you're starting to believe it yourself." "I don't know what you mean. Yesterday you called me in a panic because your refrigerator was making noise, asking whether you could afford to call a repair service. Claire, you have over $2 million in assets. You could buy a new refrigerator every month for the next decade without affecting your financial security." She was right. I'd become so invested in maintaining the fiction of my poverty that I'd started experiencing genuine anxiety about minor expenses. The carefully constructed persona of struggling widow Claire Montgomery was beginning to overshadow the reality of successful investor C. Montgomery. "I think I'm losing myself," I admitted. "You're not losing yourself. You're hiding yourself. There's a difference." "But what if William can't handle the truth? What if knowing about my involvement with his company destroys his confidence? What if it doesn't? What if your son is stronger and more resilient than you're giving him credit for?" The conversation haunted me through the week leading up to Henderson Industries' final decision. William was increasingly stressed, staying late at the office for strategy sessions and coming to dinner exhausted but wired with nervous energy. "This could change everything," he told me one evening, stabbing at his meatloaf with unnecessary force. "If we land Henderson Montgomery and Associates moves into a completely different tier of agencies, I could be looking at senior partner within 2 years." I wanted to tell him that senior partnership was practically guaranteed if Henderson signed with the firm, that the board had already identified him as future leadership material, that his career trajectory was more secure than he realized. Instead, I made sympathetic sounds about the pressure he was under, and offered to make his favorite dessert. "Thanks, Mom, but Caroline and I are going to her place after dinner. She's been so supportive through this whole process. It means a lot to have someone who understands the stakes." After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the life I'd built in secret. The financial statements tucked away in my office showed a woman of considerable wealth and business acumen. The dishes in my sink and the worn furniture around me showed a woman barely getting by on Social Security and pension payments. The person William respected and relied on for emotional support was Caroline, whose understanding of the stakes was limited to her observation that landing big clients was important for career advancement. The person he dismissed as financially irrelevant was the board member who'd been instrumental in creating the business environment that made his success possible. I pulled out my laptop and reviewed the latest reports from Montgomery and Associates. The company was performing exceptionally well, partly due to Williams' contributions and partly due to strategic investments and guidance I'd provided through my board position. My financial stake in the firm had increased significantly as its valuation grew, making me not just an investor but a major stakeholder in Williams' professional world. Yet my own son considered me so financially incompetent that he'd enlisted his girlfriend to help me evaluate senior living facilities. The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to sustain. I was living two completely contradictory lives, excelling in one while failing in the other, respected by business professionals while being patronized by my own family. Something had to give. The question was whether I had the courage to bring these two identities together, knowing that the revelation might fundamentally change my relationship with William. As I locked up the house that night, I made a decision. Regardless of how Henderson Industries responded to the proposal, I was going to find a way to show William who I really was. The only question remaining was how to do it without destroying everything we'd built together. The crisis arrived on a gray November morning with a phone call that would test everything I'd been working toward. Cole Lillard's voice was tense when he reached me at home, using my personal number reserved for board emergencies. Montgomery, we have a problem with the Henderson Industries account. I need you at the office within the hour. I'd never heard Cole sound rattled before. As managing partner, he prided himself on maintaining composure even during difficult client negotiations. The fact that he was calling board members for an emergency meeting sent alarm bells through my system. "What's happened?" I asked, already moving toward my closet to find appropriate business attire. Henderson's CEO flew in unexpectedly this morning. Apparently they've received information that's making them reconsider our proposal. I can't discuss details over the phone, but if we lose this account, it won't just affect our revenue projections, it could damage our reputation with other enterprise clients. The 30-minute drive to downtown Denver felt endless. I'd become deeply invested in Montgomery and Associates' success, not just as a board member, but as someone who'd watched the company grow from a promising startup into a respected mid-tier agency. More than that, I knew how much landing Henderson Industries meant to William personally and professionally. The emergency board meeting was held in Cole's office rather than the formal conference room, lending an air of crisis management to the proceedings. Francis Dane Sr. looked grim as he reviewed documents on his tablet, while Lila Cross paced near the windows overlooking the city. "Here's what we know," Cole began without preamble. Henderson's CEO, Marcus Dane, received a call yesterday from someone claiming to have insider information about Montgomery and Associates' financial structure. The caller suggested that our recent expansion and technology investments were funded through questionable means, potentially indicating instability or unethical business practices. My blood ran cold. What kind of insider information? Details about our board composition, our funding sources, our decision-making processes. Someone with access to confidential information has been feeding Henderson Industries selective facts designed to undermine their confidence in our firm. Francis leaned forward in his chair. "Do we have any idea who might be behind this?" "That's what we need to figure out." Marcus Dane wouldn't reveal his source, but he was specific enough about our internal operations that it has to be someone with board-level access or extensive knowledge of our business relationships. I felt sick. The idea that someone was using confidential information to sabotage the company, and by extension William's career, was both professionally outrageous and personally devastating. "What exactly did they tell Henderson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Cole consulted his notes. "They suggested that our recent growth has been artificially accelerated through investments from sources that might create conflicts of interest. They implied that our proposal team might not have the independence necessary to deliver objective results." The irony was almost unbearable. Someone was attacking Montgomery Associates for the very thing I'd been worried about, the ethical implications of my hidden involvement in William's professional success. But they were doing it through corporate sabotage rather than honest disclosure.
Have you considered that this might be coming from a competitor? Lila suggested. If Brennan Marketing or Stevens and Associates knew how close we were to landing Henderson, they might resort to dirty tactics to undermine our position.
It's possible, Francis agreed. But the information was too specific, too accurate. This feels like internal knowledge being weaponized by someone with a personal agenda. I thought about the handful of people who knew about my board involvement, the small circle of professionals who understood the full scope of my investments in the firm. Could one of them be working against the company's interests? What's Henderson's current position? I asked. They've postponed their final decision pending an investigation into our corporate structure. Marcus Dane wants to review our financial statements, our investor agreements, and our governance policies before moving forward. If they find anything that suggests improper influence or conflicts of interest, they'll terminate discussions immediately. The weight of the situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Henderson Industries wasn't just questioning Montgomery and Associates' business practices. They were essentially conducting an audit of my secret involvement in the company. If they dug deeply enough, they would discover that Montgomery Holdings was controlled by Claire Montgomery, whose son happened to be the lead on their account. Even though my investment had been legitimate and my board participation had been ethical, the appearance of conflict would be impossible to explain without revealing the family connection I'd worked so hard to hide. There's something else, Cole continued. Henderson specifically requested that their account team have no knowledge of our investor structure during the investigation. They want to evaluate our proposal purely on its merits, without any potential bias from knowing about our funding sources. What does that mean for William? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing more personal investment than Montgomery should have had in any individual employee. Cole looked surprised by my reaction. Patterson doesn't know about this crisis yet. We're keeping the investigation confidential until we understand what we're dealing with. But if Henderson pulls out, it will obviously affect his standing within the firm. This was going to be his signature win. I felt trapped between my roles as protective mother and responsible board member. William had worked harder on the Henderson proposal than any project in his career, pouring his creativity and strategic thinking into something he believed could establish him as a senior marketing talent. Now his achievement was threatened by corporate espionage that might trace back to the very support system I'd created to help him succeed. How long do we have? I asked. Henderson wants preliminary responses to their concerns by end of business tomorrow. Full documentation within a week. If we can't satisfy their questions about our independence and integrity, they'll announce their decision to work with another agency. As the meeting broke up, I realized that my careful balance between secret support and family boundaries was about to collapse. The investigation Henderson Industries demanded would inevitably reveal my dual identity, and when it did, William would learn about my board position at the worst possible moment, when it looked like a conflict of interest that had cost him his biggest professional opportunity. The person who'd been secretly orchestrating his success was about to be exposed as the potential cause of his most devastating failure. I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to protect both my son's career and my own integrity, knowing that the stakes had never been higher for either of us. I spent that entire night in my home office, surrounded by 4 years of investment documents, board meeting minutes, and financial records that told the story of my involvement with Montgomery and Associates. If Henderson Industries was determined to investigate the company's funding sources and governance structure, I needed to be prepared for every possible line of inquiry. But more than that, I needed to find a way to save William's career without destroying it in the process. By 3 in the morning, I developed a strategy that was risky but potentially effective. Rather than waiting for Henderson's investigation to uncover my identity, I would control the narrative by providing them with a complete and transparent account of my involvement, but I would do it in a way that demonstrated the integrity of both my investment and William's work. I called my attorney at 7 a.m., knowing that Margaret Chen was an early riser who often worked from home before office hours. "Claire, this is unusual even for you," she said after I'd outlined the situation. "You want to voluntarily disclose your identity to Henderson Industries before they discover it through their investigation. I want to get ahead of this before it becomes a scandal that destroys my son's reputation," I said. "Margaret, if Henderson finds out about my board position through their investigation, it will look like I was hiding something unethical. But if I proactively provide them with complete documentation of my investment history and board participation, I can demonstrate that everything was legitimate and above board. What about William? He still doesn't know about your involvement. That's a risk I'll have to take. His career is more important than his feelings about my deception." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Claire, you realize that Henderson might still walk away even if your involvement was completely ethical. Some companies have policies against working with agencies where board members have family relationships with account teams. Then at least William will know that he lost the account because of a corporate policy, not because his work wasn't good enough, or because his mother was involved in something unethical." By 9 a.m., I was sitting in Margaret's office, reviewing a comprehensive disclosure package that documented every aspect of my investment in Montgomery and Associates. The materials showed that my initial funding had been provided through legitimate financial instruments, that my board participation had been based on business expertise rather than family connections, and that I had never used my position to give William preferential treatment or inside information. More importantly, the package included detailed analysis of Montgomery and Associates' performance metrics, client satisfaction rates, and employee development programs, all of which showed that the company's success was based on merit rather than artificial advantages. "This is impressive documentation," Margaret said, as she reviewed the final draft. "You've essentially created a case study in ethical investment practices. But Claire, are you prepared for how William is going to react when he learns about this? I have to hope that he'll understand I was trying to support him without interfering with his independence. And if he doesn't?" I thought about the alternative, watching Henderson Industries conduct an investigation that would portray my involvement as secretive and potentially manipulative, seeing William's reputation damaged by suspicions of nepotism, losing the client that represented his biggest professional achievement. Then at least his career will survive, even if our relationship doesn't. At 10:30, I called Marcus Dane directly, identifying myself as C. Montgomery, and requesting an immediate meeting to discuss Henderson Industries' concerns about Montgomery and Associates. "Mr. Dane, I understand you have questions about our corporate structure and funding sources. Rather than having you investigate these matters secondhand, I'd like to provide you with complete transparency about my involvement with the firm." There was surprise in his voice. "That's an unusual approach, Miss Montgomery. Most investors prefer to maintain their privacy during these kinds of inquiries. Most investors don't have personal stakes in ensuring that your concerns are addressed honestly and thoroughly." We arranged to meet at Henderson Industries' temporary Denver offices at 2 p.m. I spent the intervening hours reviewing my presentation materials and preparing for what might be the most important business meeting of my life. Marcus Dane was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that successful tech executives often develop. He listened without interruption as I walked through my investment history with Montgomery and Associates, my qualifications for board participation, and my approach to corporate governance. "Miss Montgomery, this level of documentation is extraordinary," he said, when I finished. "Most investment disclosures are much less comprehensive. I want you to have complete confidence in Montgomery and Associates' integrity," I said. "But I also need to disclose something that might affect your evaluation of our proposal." I took a deep breath and continued. "The lead marketing director on your account, William Montgomery, is my son." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus Dane's expression shifted from professional interest to sharp attention. "Your son works for the agency where you're a board member," he said slowly. "Yes. He's been employed there for 5 years, but he has no knowledge of my board position or investment. I've maintained complete separation between my business involvement and his career development." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I believe transparency is more important than protecting my privacy. If you're going to work with Montgomery and Associates, you deserve to know all the relevant facts. My son is genuinely talented, and his proposal was developed without any input or influence from me. But I understand if this family connection makes you uncomfortable about moving forward." Marcus spent the next hour reviewing my documentation and asking detailed questions about my investment decisions and board participation. His questions were sharp but fair, focused on understanding whether my involvement had compromised the agency's independence or integrity. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at me directly. "Miss Montgomery, I've never seen an investor provide this level of voluntary disclosure. Most people in your position would have hoped we never discovered the family connection. Most people don't have sons whose careers could be destroyed by suspicions of impropriety. That's exactly why I'm inclined to move forward with Montgomery and Associates," he said. "Your willingness to risk your privacy to protect their reputation tells me everything I need to know about the company's integrity." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. I'd saved Henderson Industries for Montgomery and Associates and protected William's reputation from scandal. But now I had to tell my son that his financially worthless mother was actually one of the most powerful people in his professional world. The call came at 6:47 p.m., just as I was pushing my dinner around my plate too nervous to eat. William's voice was strained when I answered, carrying an emotional weight I hadn't heard since the day his father died. "Mom, I need to come over. Something's happened at work, and I don't know who else to talk to." My heart lurched. Had Henderson Industries already informed Montgomery and Associates about my disclosure? Had Cole Lillard told William about my board position before I could explain it myself? "Of course, sweetheart. Are you all right?" "I don't know. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes pacing through my house, rehearsing different ways to explain what I'd done, and why I'd done it. But when William walked through my front door, his face was a mixture of confusion and devastation that made all my prepared speeches evaporate. "Mom, the strangest thing happened today," he said, slumping into the same kitchen chair where he'd dismissed my financial knowledge so many times. "Henderson Industries called Cole personally to say they were moving forward with our proposal, but they wanted to meet with me privately before signing the contract." I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. What did they want to discuss? That's the weird part. Marcus Dane spent an hour asking me about my work process, my relationship with the other board members, whether I felt I had complete creative freedom at Montgomery & Associates. It was like he was trying to determine whether someone had been influencing my work behind the scenes. The irony was almost unbearable. Henderson Industries was essentially investigating whether William knew about my involvement while I sat there knowing exactly why they were asking these questions. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I've always felt completely independent at Montgomery and Associates, that I've never received special treatment or insider information, that my success there has been based entirely on my own work." William ran his hands through his hair. "But Mom, some of his questions were so specific." He asked about the company's funding sources, about whether I knew any of the major investors personally. It was like he knew something I didn't. I could see the anxiety building in his eyes, the fear that his professional achievement was somehow compromised by factors outside his control.
William, what if I told you there was something about Montgomery and Associates that you didn't know? Something that might explain why Henderson Industries was asking those questions. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? I stood up and walked to my office, returning with a folder containing copies of the same documents I'd shown Marcus Dane earlier that day. My hands were shaking as I placed it on the table between us. Before I explain this, I need you to know that everything you've accomplished at Montgomery and Associates is real. Your talent, your creativity, your success, all of that came from you. But there are some things about the company that I should have told you a long time ago. William opened the folder and stared at the first page, a Montgomery and Associates board roster listing C. Montgomery as one of the primary investors and directors. Mom, I don't understand. Who is C. Montgomery? I am. The words hung in the air between us. William's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like betrayal. You're on the board of my company. I've been a major investor and board member for 4 years, since about a year after you started working there. William stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Are you telling me that my mother is one of my bosses? William, please sit down. Let me explain how this happened. How this happened? Mom, you've been lying to me for 4 years. While I've been working my ass off trying to prove myself at that company, you've been sitting in board meetings making decisions about my career. It's not like that. I never. Then what is it like? His voice was getting louder, and I was grateful that my nearest neighbors were far enough away that they wouldn't hear our conversation. Explain to me how my mother became a secret investor in my company while lecturing me about independence and letting me think she was broke. I took a deep breath and tried to find words that would make him understand. After your father died, I inherited more money than you realized. I needed to invest it wisely, and Montgomery and Associates was a growing company with strong leadership and good prospects. So you decided to buy into my workplace without telling me. I decided to invest in a company that I believed in. The fact that you worked there was initially a coincidence. Initially? William, sit down, please, there's more you need to know. Reluctantly, he returned to his chair, but his posture remained rigid. Defensive. The Henderson Industries investigation happened because someone tried to sabotage Montgomery and Associates by suggesting that our funding sources were questionable. Cole called an emergency board meeting this morning because Henderson was threatening to pull out. And you were in that meeting, discussing my account. Yes, and when I realized that their investigation might uncover my identity anyway, I decided to tell them the truth myself. I met with Marcus Dane this afternoon and disclosed everything, my investment history, my board position, and the fact that you're my son. William's face went pale. You told Henderson Industries that I'm your son. I told them so they would know that your work was completed without any influence from me. So they would understand that your proposal was based on your own talent and research, not on inside information or family favoritism. Jesus, Mom. Do you realize what you've done? I reached across the table, but he pulled his hands away. I've protected your reputation and saved your account. Henderson Industries is moving forward with Montgomery and Associates because they're confident in the integrity of both the company and your work. But now everyone will know. My colleagues, my clients, other agencies in the industry. Everyone will think my career was built on nepotism. No, William. Everyone will know that you succeeded at a company where your mother was an investor, but that you did it without knowing about her involvement.
If anything, that proves your success was genuine. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across the table. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a pain that cut straight through my heart. Mom, how am I supposed to trust anything about my career now? How do I know which opportunities I earned and which ones you created for? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I'd never found a satisfactory answer for. I guess you'll have to decide whether you believe in yourself enough to know the difference. William spent the next 10 minutes reading through the documents in silence, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching understanding. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter but still strained. Mom, this says you've invested over $1.2 million in Montgomery and Associates. Yes, and you've been attending board meetings for 4 years, making strategic decisions about the company's direction. Yes, he flipped to another page, scanning the financial summaries. According to this, you're not just an investor, you're one of the largest stakeholders in the firm. I nodded, watching his face as he processed the implications. The conference room upgrades, the new technology systems, the retention bonuses that kept our senior staff from leaving. All of that came from funding you approved. The board approved those expenditures based on sound business reasoning. But yes, I supported those investments. William set the papers down and looked directly at me. Mom, who are you? The question was so simple, yet so complex. For 3 years, I'd been living as two different people, the struggling widow he thought he knew, and the successful businesswoman I'd hidden from him. I'm someone who loved you enough to let you think I was financially worthless rather than risk you feeling like your achievements weren't your own. But they weren't entirely my own, were they? You've been creating the conditions for my success while I had no idea. I reached for the folder again, and pulled out another set of documents, my complete investment portfolio, spanning real estate, stocks, bonds, and business partnerships. William, look at this. Really look at it. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. Mom, this shows assets worth over $2 million. I'm not living on your father's pension. I haven't been struggling financially. I've been building wealth while you assumed I was barely getting by. He stared at the numbers, then back at me. The house, the car, the way you live. Why? Because I learned something your father never understood. Real wealth isn't about impressing people with what you own. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on what matters to you rather than what you can afford. And what mattered to you was secretly controlling my career. What mattered to me was making sure you had every opportunity to succeed while believing you were doing it on your own merit. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I should have trusted you to handle the truth. But William, look at what you've accomplished. I pulled out his Henderson Industries proposal, the version that had won the account. This work is brilliant. The creative strategy, the market analysis, the execution plan, this came from your mind, your talent, your dedication. I didn't write a single word of it. I didn't suggest a single concept. All I did was help create an environment where your abilities could flourish. But you influenced that environment in ways I never knew about. Yes, and I'm sorry I wasn't honest about that from the beginning. William was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, still hurt, but also something approaching curiosity. Mom, when you said I was financially naive, when I told you that you didn't understand how money works in the real world, did you want to tell me the truth then? Every single time. But I was afraid that knowing about my success would make you question your own. Instead, not knowing made me disrespect you. The simple acknowledgement hung between us, carrying the weight of all our recent conflicts. Yes, I said softly, it did. William pushed back from the table and began pacing around my small kitchen, his hands running through his hair in the gesture I'd recognized since he was a child struggling with difficult homework. "I need to understand something," he said, stopping to face me. "When I called you financially worthless, when I suggested you move into assisted living, when I brought Caroline here to help you make realistic financial decisions, you just sat there and took it." The memory of those conversations felt like physical pain. Yes, why? Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you tell me I was being an arrogant ass to someone who actually knows more about money than I do? I looked at my hands, folded in my lap, because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd never be able to take pride in your own accomplishments again. I thought your self-respect was more important than mine. Jesus, Mom, his voice cracked slightly. Do you realize how that makes me feel? I spent months condescending to you about business and finance, while you were sitting on a board making million-dollar decisions. You were trying to help. You genuinely thought I needed guidance. I was being a patronizing jerk to my own mother. He sat back down heavily. And Caroline, oh God, Caroline was going to help you evaluate senior living facilities. We were going to manage your finances because we thought you were incompetent. Caroline was trying to be helpful too. Caroline was trying to be helpful to someone she thought was a broke old lady, while that person was actually more financially successful than both of us combined. He shook his head. Mom, this is humiliating. For you or for me? The question stopped him short. What do you mean? William, you're embarrassed because you made incorrect assumptions about my financial situation. But I'm the one who spent 3 years being dismissed and patronized by her own son. I'm the one who had to sit quietly while you explained how the modern economy works to someone who was actively participating in it, at levels you didn't even know existed. He was quiet for a moment, processing the shift in perspective. You're right, I've been treating you terribly. His voice was smaller now, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since he was much younger. Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for the things I said to you. I know you are, but I'm also angry. Not just at myself, but at you. You let me make those mistakes. You let me humiliate myself by lecturing you about things you understood better than I do. I did. Why? Why was protecting my ego more important than protecting yourself? I considered the question carefully. Because I thought that was what love meant. Putting your needs ahead of my own, even when it hurt. That's not love, Mom. That's martyrdom. The bluntness of his words hit me harder than his earlier anger had. Maybe you're right, I am right. And we both need to figure out how to do better. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd maintained for years, while he assumed I couldn't afford proper landscaping. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. My promotion last year, the Henderson Industries account assignment, the resources and support I've received at Montgomery & Associates. How much of that was because of your influence? It was the question I'd been dreading most, the one that cut to the heart of his fears about his own competence. William, in 4 years of board meetings, I have never once advocated for you to receive special treatment. I've never suggested you for promotions, I've never pushed for you to get particular assignments, and I've never asked Cole or the other board members to give you advantages you hadn't earned. But you've supported decisions that benefited me. I've supported decisions that benefited the entire company. Including you, yes, but not exclusively you. That's not the same thing as earning it myself. No, I said quietly. It's not. But William, success is rarely achieved in isolation. Everyone benefits from supportive environments, mentoring relationships, and opportunities created by others. The question isn't whether you had advantages, it's whether you made the most of them. He turned back to face me. And you think I did? I think you created work that impressed Henderson Industries enough that they're moving forward with our proposal even after learning about our family connection. I think your colleagues respect you, your clients trust you, and your creative output speaks for itself. But I'll never know for sure, will I? I'll always wonder whether I would have succeeded without my mother's invisible help. The pain in his voice broke my heart, because I realized he was right. My attempts to support him while preserving his independence had instead created a permanent uncertainty about his own capabilities. No, I admitted. You probably won't know for sure, and that's my fault. 3 months later, I was sitting in the same kitchen where William had once called me financially worthless, but everything between us had changed. He arrived for our weekly Sunday dinner carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, a gesture that had become his way of acknowledging the financial reality I'd hidden for so long. "How did the board meeting go?" he asked, settling into his chair with the easy familiarity of someone who no longer felt awkward discussing my business activities. "Very well. Henderson Industries wants to expand their contract for next quarter, and Cole thinks we're positioned to land 2 more enterprise accounts based on the success of your campaign." William smiled, but I could see the complexity behind it, pride in his achievement mixed with the ongoing uncertainty about how much of his success was truly his own. "I've been thinking about something," he said, as I served the roast I'd prepared. "I want to apply for a position at Brennan Marketing." I paused, serving spoon halfway to his plate. Brennan Marketing was Montgomery & Associates' biggest competitor, a firm where I had no connections or influence. "Any particular reason?" "I need to know if I can succeed somewhere that my mother isn't a board member. I need to prove to myself that my skills are transferable, that what I've accomplished isn't just the result of working in a company you've invested in." The request hurt, but I understood it. "That makes sense. I'm not leaving because I'm angry with you anymore. I'm leaving because I need to be sure of who I am professionally, independent of our relationship." I reached across the table and took his hand. "William, whatever you decide about your career, I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become. Not the marketing director, not the successful professional, the person who had the courage to forgive me for my mistakes and the wisdom to chart his own path forward. I learned that from my mother," he said with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "The woman who built a multi-million-dollar portfolio while letting everyone think she shopped at discount stores." "I still shop at discount stores," I said. "Some habits die hard. And some mothers," William said, raising his wineglass, "are worth more than their sons ever imagined." As we clinked glasses in my modest kitchen, I realized that losing my secret had gained me something far more valuable, a son who knew exactly who his mother was and loved her anyway. The financially worthless woman was gone. In her place was someone both of us could respect.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.